Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back from our episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have, do you trust the government to control AI from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't trust the government to do much of anything, and I definitely don't trust it in regards to AI. I don't really trust private corporations in regards to AI either, but at least I'm not forced to pay taxpayer dollars to private corporations. So yeah, personally, I think AI, it's very much, my position on AI is very much the same as my position on guns, drugs, and abortions. They're a tool, yes, they can be misused, but ultimately, it's ultimately each individual's decision to do whatever they want with them that they feel like, and that's my thoughts there. If AI can be misused just like guns, drugs, and abortions can, but that's not a reason to regulate it. Ultimately, it should be up to each individual what they want to justify doing with AI, just like they want to do with anything else. Like as I said earlier, like guns, drugs, and abortions. Those things aren't inherent good, and they can definitely be misused and hurt people. But ultimately, it should come down to what each individual wants to justify, as long as they're not hurting anyone else. Next, we have Happy Killdozer Day, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a meme they did, Happy Killdozer Day, June 4, 2004, and it's a picture of the Killdozer from Granby, Colorado, and I remember that story was a guy who got fed up with his local government, so he built a Killdozer and destroyed all their other properties. And yeah, personally, some people might not like that, but I definitely do think, it's good, because, he didn't kill anyone besides himself after he did the incident. And yeah, ultimately, I think one of his quotes was, unreasonable people, sometimes reasonable people have to do unreasonable things. And also I think my state Libertarian Party post did, tread on people who tread on you. So ultimately, I definitely do think it's standing up for yourself. It's a little bit more on the crazy side, building a giant killer bulldozer, but if sometimes that's the message that has to be sent, that you guys been treading on me, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And that's very much, I think, we the American people need to do these days. But sadly, I think people are too busy jerking off on social media to actually do that. But maybe we'll see it one day. But I'm personally not holding my breath, since everyone's just too busy jerking themselves off on social media 24/7. Next, we have, what are the chances it passes, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that looks like a screenshot of a tweet from Americans for Tax Fairness. Breaking at Senator Ruben Gallego just introduced the Robin Hood Act. Billionaires avoid ever paying capital gains tax by borrowing against their assets instead of selling them. The Robin Hood Act would make them pay taxes on the loans they take out. No more loophole, no more cheating. And yeah, personally, I don't think people should be forced to pay taxes if they don't want to. If the government wants to pass this act and force the billionaires to pay taxes, that's fine, but they'll just put their money on offshore accounts anyway. And it just goes to show you that, taxation might sound like a good idea, but it's really just going to contribute to people just putting their money elsewhere rather than keeping it in the country. And that's definitely true when it comes to billionaires. Next, we have Happy Killdozer Day to all the reasonable people out there, posted by LP of PC, and that's a cross post from the Granby, Colorado subreddit, The Reasonable Man, and that's another Killdozer Day post. Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things. Komatsu D355A, 13 buildings plus 5 miles per hour. I think that's the Mali used boating skill, plus 100 armor, plus 100 egress, no more hurt, 100 Murals, took this argument directly local armor, plus 100 decisiveness. And yeah, I agree with all that. I definitely do think, a lot of the normies might think building a Killdozer because you're pissed at the local government, maybe on the extreme side, but you can't really listen to the normies. They just are basically just, they'll believe whatever the TV says. You gotta think for yourself rather than believe whatever the TV says. That's kind of like my parents. They'll just believe whatever the TV says. They won't question it at all. Well, these days, I think you gotta question everything, and increasingly, thanks to social media, people are allowed to question everything as much as they want to, rather than just going with whatever the official narrative is. Next, we have DC's crime drop didn't require a military deployment from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think that you should be deploying the military out in the streets, but ultimately, if the government wants to deploy the military out in the streets, they're in a position of authority to do so. I personally think, the libertarian position on crime, we shouldn't have the military or police doing it. So there's still state-run police. We should have private individuals and private militias doing it instead. That's how we'll really maintain law and order. Right now, the state has directly control of what constitutes law and order. When in reality, I think it would be better if the individual did rather than the forced collective state. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have DOD officially drops 180 face for military's recognized religion list from military.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman. And yeah, personally, I think the DOD should try and recognize as many faiths as possible. I don't know what the faiths dropped were. Maybe some woke stuff like Satanism, IDK. But ultimately, it comes down to what the government wants to recognize when it comes to the whatever religion people have. And I personally think, you should try and recognize as many religions as possible, but, ultimately, if the government doesn't only wants to recognize a select few, it has every ability to justify that action. Next, we have Donald Trump just tripled the size of his personal army inside government. It was illegal, from Defiance.news, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's cross-posts from the No Filter News subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but of course Reddit only cares since he's in the out group rather than the in group. I'm sure if Sleepy Joe did that, Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever, but since it's Don the Con doing it instead, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever. And yeah, it just goes to show you that they have no principles, only teams. They'll be completely fine with the weaponized federal government when their team is back in power, but since the out group's in power right now, it's the worst thing ever. Next, we have lawsuit says a Memphis police task force waged a harassment campaign against people who filmed them, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I definitely do think if you want to film police, you should be able to. But, ultimately, you have to remember that police are in a position of government authority, so they might not like that. If you want to get in the police's faces and start filming them, I think that's fine. But, it definitely kind of strikes me as something that's kind of being an idiotic thing to do, especially since they're in a, if they want to justify acting against you because you're annoying them, oftentimes they're not going to be held accountable because the state controls the courts and legal system as well. Next, we have the feds wasted $186 billion on improper payments last year, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately the federal government has shown it can piss away, all forms of government, really, state, local, federal, but federal particularly, it's shown it can just piss away and count as many taxpayer dollars as it wants to, and ultimately there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have Todd Blanche hates weaponization of government unless it benefits his boss, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie and say he's not a hypocrite, but Reddit loves the weaponized government when it's their team doing it. It's the same with this guy. A lot of people just have no principles, only teams. They love authoritarianism when it's their side doing it. A lot of people just want a dictator they agree with. They have no principles. It's just their team good, other team bad. Next, we have Philly cops admit they're tracking First Amendment activity critical of AI, from TheIntercept.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't think they should be doing that. But ultimately, if the government wants to track people for whatever reason they want to, they're in a position of state authority to do so. And yeah, I personally don't think the government should be tracking people without their consent, but sadly, that's not how the world works. The world works, if people want to have the means and resources to justify something like the government does, the government's going to have a lot of times resources to justify whatever it wants to. Sadly, there's nothing you can really do about that, and that's my fault there. Next, we have UK has most taxes since era after Napoleonic Wars, study shows, from Bloomberg.com, posted by Socialist or Morons. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But the UK is clearly pretty much a failed state at this point. It reminds me of the UK from V for Vendetta. Only instead of the fascist Norse fire, it's the woke fascists instead that are running the place. And yeah, just because just because, a lot of Redditors like woke authoritarianism doesn't make it right. The police I remember there was this big thing over there that this guy Henry Nowak got stabbed by a Sikh guy, and the police handcuffed him instead because they were accused him of racism. It just goes to show you how woke it is over there. And yeah, ultimately, I think libertarian position is, the UK's lost cause. You might as well let it. It would be better off if it pulled into Atlantis and sank under the waves at this point, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have the destruction of 3D printing. Bloomberg is behind it, posted by the Fool of Emmaus, and that's a YouTube video from Louis Rossman. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is if you want to do 3D printing, you should be able to. If you want to do 3D printing guns, you should be able to. 3D printed sex toys, 3D printing whatever you want. I guess you could make the argument that what if it's at a local library and people might not be okay with it. And I guess ultimately the local library is government controlled a lot of the time. I think that's important to remember as well. But yeah, ultimately I think we should be able to justify whatever you want with 3D printing, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have the debate over Israel aid is coming. Congress wants to future-proof the relationship first from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, if Congress wants to pour endless money into Israel, I personally don't care for it. Same as pouring endless money into Ukraine. But as I said earlier, the government can piss away with taxpayer dollars whenever it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have, quote, we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Posted by Woke Boogeyman, they said, I swore never to be silent whenever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere when human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy. National borders and sensitives become irrelevant. Whenever men and women are persecuted because of their racial, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, be on the center of the universe. And that was a quote from Eli Wiesel's 1986 Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. And yeah, personally, I think that's a very Reddit way of thinking of things. Reddit always wants you to take a side, but when in reality, I would say, the libertarian position is pick whatever side you want, or don't take a side. Choose whatever you want. Sometimes people on one side are going to be mean, sometimes people on the other side are going to be mean. But I would say both major sides right now are very unlibertarian, so you shouldn't be forced to pick a side if you don't want to. Ultimately, the libertarian position is, justify joining whatever side you want to, or not joining a side. If you don't want to join a side, you shouldn't be forced to pick a side, and that's very much the libertarian position on that issue. Next, we have, what is y'all opinion on libertarian unity or mass cooperation between left and right freedom fighters for the idea of obtaining common goals like freedom of speech, right to self-harm, and anti-corporate action, posted by Wonderful Cake 6079, and they added, was wondering since the sub has a healthy amount of left and right, that is then what is everyone's opinions of uniting or cooperating in the name of freedom or shared goals. And yeah, personally, I think that if people do want to cooperate, despite having some political differences that they should be able to. But sadly, these days, it seems like people really like to focus more on their differences than things they have in common, and that just seems to be true regardless of what labels people use. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump worries he could be held accountable for his actions from Yahoo.com, posted by Connor Brock, and that's crosspost from the Anarcho-Capitalism subreddit, and they added, just as no law was enough to stop him, no law will be enough to protect him. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Trump, but ultimately, if Trump is held accountable, he's really the exception rather than the rule. Because Bush wasn't held accountable for Iraq, and Obama wasn't held accountable for Libya. Why should Trump be held accountable for anything? It's a two-tier justice system, and Trump's much more on that top tier until proven otherwise, I would say. Same with Bush, Obama, and all the other elites, I would say, yeah. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump pardons former congressman convicted of insider trading from nytimes.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, I personally don't think, he should be pardoning him. But, if he wants to pardon whoever he wants to feel like, and people are ultimately going to just defer to what the president says a lot of the time. And yeah, that's personally why I personally don't think the president shouldn't have such broad pardon power. But sadly, we live in the world where the president can pretty much justify whatever they want to. And, there's often nothing you can do about it. But, at the same time, I think it's just mostly just political theater. The president's really more of a figurehead than anything else. The deep state military industrial complex, the Satanic Cabal of Liberals Group people, they're the ones really running the show, whatever you want to call them. Next, we have, even if Trump's ballroom project is illegal, a DOJ lawyer says the courts cannot stop it, from Reason.com, posted by Jolly Porcupine. And yeah, I actually replied to this post of theirs in the anarcho-capitalist subreddit. I can't put on this subreddit since they banned me a couple years ago, but, I'm still going to try and be active on Reddit as much as possible, even if they want me censored, because, you can't let the woke mobs of censorship win, just like you can't let the MAGA mob censorship win. You gotta support freedom of speech as much as possible. Anyway, I said, it just goes to show that the laws are just words on a piece of paper. What matters is how they are enforced. Even if Trump's ballroom project is technically illegal, if they want to justify having the work people over and build it anyway, who's going to stop them? It's very much who watches the Watchmen. When the state can justify doing whatever it feels like, regardless of what laws on the books, who's to stop them? Because they're the ones ultimately with the position of authority, and oftentimes, if you want to if you have authority, no one can stop you. Next, we have federal judge presses attorney on how Idaho's transgender bathroom ban will work. To prove someone's sex, checking transgender people's ID cards can be tricky, the judge suggested, but Idaho's Solicitor General argued that law enforcement officers could test people's DNA, from IdahoCapitalSun.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, personally, transgenderism is one of the wedge issues like abortion they love to divide people on, to distract from the fact that they agree on like 95% of issues. But regardless, ultimately, if the state does want to enforce a transgender bathroom ban, the state can enforce whatever it wants to. But it's easier said than done. You just can't have armed guards at the entrance to every woman's bathroom, and I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have, this attempt by the Trump administration to cripple legal immigration is illegal, judge rules, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, if the judge wants to say one thing, that's fine. But as I said earlier, the judge can rule one way, but, ultimately it comes down to how laws are enforced rather than what the judge says. And also, a lot of times people are just going to defer to whatever the president says in matters of law. So sadly, I don't think this really means too much. Next, we have, what is this political party symbol? Posted by FlimsyOut5563, and that's a crosspost from the What Does This Mean subreddit. It looks like a bumper sticker of the Libertarian Party's porcupine. And yeah, personally, I like the porcupine because, it's very much leave me alone. And the Republicans might have the elephant, Democrats might have the donkey, but I like the porcupine because, libertarians are about being left alone if they want to be left alone. And that's very much what libertarians should be. Leave people alone when they feel like it. And if they don't feel like being left alone, I'm sure they'll let you know. And that's my thoughts there. And then I had to post the Libertarian Party USA subreddit I wanted to share as well. I said, libertarian perspectives on the Ridgeway side and get an abortion after discovering the baby would have Down syndrome. I said, for those out of the loop, linked an article from the USA Today. Jesse Ridgeway YouTuber gets death threats after ending pregnancy over Down syndrome. And I added, as someone who's usually been on the pro-choice side of the abortion debate, I definitely think they should have been able to do it. To me, abortion is very much a bodily autonomy issue, and as long as the baby is inside the mother, I'm not saying gestating parent. I linked to an article from New York Post. Downs replaced mother with gestating parent, latest woke rewrite of NY law. But I said, ultimately, it's her choice to do whatever she wants with it. With that being said, I definitely do think if people want to regard them as basically murdering their baby, that they should be able to do so. Just because you should be free to make decisions doesn't mean that people should have to agree with it. If they want to think it's scummy, which I very much agree with, they should have every right to do so. Thoughts? And yeah, ultimately, people are going to justify if they justify, if you want to think abortion is murder, I think you should have every right to do so. But I personally do think, it's important to support bodily autonomy as well, even if, you personally disagree with the reasons it's being used for. And that's my thoughts there. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.